our hearts. Something we really care about deeply, and glad you are all here to join us as well. So as Filippo said, my name is Ashley Law. I'm the Youth Engagement Specialist at IFES. Sarah Timrick is joined, and she is our Youth Engagement Program Officer. So we work very, very closely together on all things youth inclusion, and even more broadly to include young people with disabilities, Indigenous youth, ethnic minority youth, religious youth, the list goes on. So I know we're sort of strapped for time now, but I would like to still encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. It'd be nice to know who you are, where you're from, and what your advocacy goals are. So just to kick it off, my name is Ashley. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And my goal is really to just empower all young people to participate in civic and political life. And so I hope you will share in the chat who you are as well. And we're really looking forward to reading through that as we go through today's training. And maybe for the sake of time, we'll just kind of move forward with the next slide and still encourage you to, share who you are and your goals in the chat. So for today's training, we're looking to really cover what it means to be an inclusive leader, to be an inclusive communicator, and all sort of in the framework of your advocacy efforts. So as you lead your advocacy campaigns and work with others to obtain your advocacy goals, it's really important that you work as a team. And this is really an essential part of inclusive and effective advocacy, and really what you're all doing as part of the broader WIDAR network. So a big part of teamwork, working together, is really making sure that people feel included. They feel that they're involved, that their opinions are being listened to, and that there's this sense of inclusion included in your efforts. And so to kind of wake up our brains a bit, kind of set the tone for today's discussion, I'd like to ask you to raise your hand and share your thoughts, or type in the chat as we go through a couple of questions. So our first question, what does inclusion mean to you? And again, I'm happy to have folks share verbally or share in the chat, however you're comfortable. But we really want to know, what does inclusion mean to you?
We have a hand up. Brenda, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. To me, inclusion is having or providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might not be in position to access those opportunities. Thank you.
Yeah, Brenda, I think that's a really great way to explain inclusion. Thank you for sharing. Would anyone else like to share?
You see in the chat, Stephen wrote, inclusion means leaving no one behind.
Absolutely. I think that's something that resonates with a lot of marginalized communities. Leave no one behind. That's great. So maybe we'll move to, Noella Luca. Please go ahead.
For me, inclusion means that there's representation
Absolutely. Representation is a very, very key component to making sure that societies are inclusive of all people. So that's a wonderful point. Yumna?
To me, inclusion is the process of providing equal access to opportunities and justice to people who might be marginalized.
I wasn't able to catch it. I don't know if anyone else did, but Yumna, maybe would you type that in the chat and we can read it aloud?
Hello, can you hear me?
I think we're struggling a bit to hear you, Yumna.
You're breaking up a bit, Yumna. I heard the word access though, which is of course important for inclusion, but I'm sure you said other wonderful things.
And these are all some wonderful answers. I wonder if we can move to the next question and continue, please, in the chat to share your thoughts. But let's switch it up a little bit and think, what's the connection between inclusion and leadership? And Ronald, I see your hand is raised, so I welcome your thoughts. Ronald, can you hear us?
Oh, yes, sorry. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please share.
I was raising on the previous question about inclusion. To me, is providing the resources and the reasonable accommodation for everyone to participate fully, regardless of their stature in society.
Yes, that's a wonderful point to raise of providing reasonable accommodations. This is definitely one of the strategies that you can employ in your advocacy efforts. So that's a great point, Ronald. Thank you. Would anyone like to comment on the link or the connection between inclusion and leadership?
Yeah, Ronald, yes. Leadership and inclusion. Leadership is providing resources and providing resources and showing the way to creating a way for the community to follow. And therefore, it is the leadership to provide the inclusion policy in society.
Mhm.
When the leadership is not in favor of inclusion, it will not be there. So leadership is important for us to have inclusion.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ronald. And I think sort of what you're getting at as well is that you can be a role model in this space as a leader. And we see this with some of our elected leaders who advocate for more inclusive policies. I feel like I just saw another hand, but maybe we'll move to the final question. And I think this was touched upon a little bit by some of the comments already, but how does inclusion link to communication? And again, these are all sort of intertwined, excuse me, as we go through today's training, thinking about inclusion, how it relates to leadership, to communication, but how the three really work together as well. Brenda, I see your hands raised.
Thank you. It's Brenda again. First of all, I would love to tackle the how does inclusion link to leadership. First of all, for example, if a community or a society is inclusive, then that means that everyone's voice is heard, and leaders are looked at as role models. Here, I mean the inclusive leaders are looked at as role models. And then how does inclusion link to communication? We all know that communication, a good communication, one has to communicate, and then feedback is brought back. For example, if this session is not maybe providing captions, that means that some people will be left out, and that means that they will miss out that information, and so the organizers may not get feedback from the specific people that have missed the presentation. So surely inclusion really links to communication, reason being that when everyone is included, then there is effective communication. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's, maybe a good comment to end on with the icebreaker. And really leads us into the definition of inclusion, which, as we define it, is really ensuring that traditionally underrepresented and marginalized groups can both access and participate in civic and political life through all aspects of their communities. So, we encourage you to think about inclusion as we go through today's training. Our hope is that you will take away some new knowledge, some new skills that you can apply in your own advocacy efforts. And I just want to say again, apologies that we haven't been able to get our closed captioning working. This is something that we had prepared for, but due to a technical glitch, we unfortunately couldn't get it working. But hopefully our slides, excuse me, have enough words on them. Communicating through the chat, we'll try to, make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible. And so I'd like to pass it over to Sarah now to really dig into the leadership aspect of our training today.
Great, thank you. So we've started to talk about leadership, and I think all of us kind of have an idea of what leadership is and what it looks like. But where we want to start today is that anyone really can be a good leader. We see girls and women being leaders, boys and men being leaders, people from different tribes or geographic locations, persons with disabilities, individuals from the LGBTQ plus community, older people being leaders, and of course, everyone here in this training. And as I've seen in the chat, all of you are doing a lot of leadership work in your own countries and in your work with the different organizations that you've shared. So looking at our definition of leadership and how we're defining leadership, leadership is working to engage, influence, or inspire people towards achieving a goal or pursuing a vision. And as we've seen across all of you here today and in our own lives, leadership can occur in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different locations. Some leaders are very visible. For example, if we see people running for an elected office, they may engage in public gatherings, they may do speeches, trying to encourage people to vote for them. But sometimes leaders are maybe less visible and they speak directly to different community members, maybe one-on-one or in groups or smaller groups. Some leaders, young leaders, for example, like many of you here today, and many of us in this day and age, will use online spaces like social media to inspire people to take action. So the qualities of good leadership, a lot of which we've talked about already in our icebreaker, can also make you a very effective leader. It's important that people are fair and ethical as leaders. These are leaders that can create an inclusive environment for all people to feel connected and part of that larger goal or vision. So kind of coming off of our icebreaker and thinking about leadership, can anyone think of a good leader maybe they know, or maybe that you can share how you've demonstrated leadership in your work? Please feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat, but what are some examples of good leaders that you might know or can think of?
Could you kindly repeat your question? We didn't get
Sure.
you well.
I've also dropped it in the chat, but what are some examples of good leaders maybe you know, or how have you demonstrated good leadership in your own work? So Elizabeth added, and then we'll go to the hands that are raised. I see a couple. Leadership is leading and organizing people or others to do a certain task. Absolutely. Happiness, I see your hand is raised. Please feel free to unmute and share.
Okay, thank you. For me, what I know about good leadership is any leader, in order to be competent and good in leadership, he must be first a good communicator. He should have a good communication skill, meaning should have a good flowing of information. And also he should be a good problem solver. Yeah.
Thank you. Happiness has also previewed a bit of our presentation later on in terms of good communication. So thank you. That's definitely true of good leaders. I'm also seeing some things in the chat. So Donald has shared having participatory and consultative methods with diverse populations. Absolutely. Everyone can be a decision maker, right? And good leaders can ensure everyone is involved in those conversations. And then also Donald championing inclusive laws and policies. Elizabeth, good leadership, effective communication, problem solver, and open-minded, all good qualities. And then Qasim has said, usually considers different perspectives from various team members in order to make comprehensive decisions. Yeah, I like that aspect of team. That's very, very true. Brenda, go ahead. I see your hand raised, and then we'll go to Ronald.
All right,
Yeah.
to me, a good leader should be a good listener. It's not all about the followers always listening to the leader, but also the leader listening to the people he leads. Thank you.
Listening, that's so important. Communication being two-way. Again, previewing a little bit more of our presentation later on. Ronald, go ahead.
Yeah, that's about a good example of a leader. I'm going to give this is a politics. It could be subjective. So in 2016, in UK, David Cameron, there was an election about Brexit, UK exiting from Europe, the European Union, and so he was supporting UK to stay, but the people voted to get out of the European Union, and so he chose to step aside, to resign, because that was not his vision. So why I say he's a good leader is so that he couldn't lead people whose vision was not in line with his, and therefore gave chance to people to choose another leader that would lead them to their vision.
Definitely. Thank you. It's tough. Yeah, sometimes it's about, your vision, and I think that connects to what Juliet said in the chat. Who does the right thing other than doing things right? So thank you. Anything else to add, Ronald? I see you're still unmuted. Oh, okay. So I think that was everyone with their hand raised, and I'm seeing some excellent points in the chat around good leadership, which we're going to continue to come back to. But I also want to add another element to this conversation, which is about ethical leadership. So when we think of good leaders, often we're also talking about ethical leaders. And ethical leadership is directed by respect for ethical beliefs and values and the dignity and rights of others, many of your comments have kind of pointed to this. So an ethical leader is one that's, again, creating this positive and inclusive environment for all people of all backgrounds. They're setting good examples. They're good communicators, and they want to make sure every process. And so another aspect of ethical leadership is really ethical leaders are also very authentic. They're themselves, they're being true to their values, but they also respect everyone and everyone's different perspectives. And people are often more likely to engage in a conversation or on social media when the message is positive, respectful, and sincere. Another aspect of ethical leadership is honesty. They'll share information that they feel will help others, and they don't have hidden agendas. So when we think about good leadership or ethical leadership, which can happen, of course, in person, offline, but also online and in digital spaces, good leaders and good advocates are better able to reach and share important information or important messages that are relevant to their community members. And that's making you an ethical leader also. So when we think of leaders, and we've been discussing a lot of great examples of good leaders that we have seen, we can also kind of categorize leadership broadly into 4 different leadership styles, which we're going to discuss next. And leadership styles can change over time. They're not static, but we can kind of categorize and break down leadership into these 4 main categories. And please continue to add your thoughts into the chat around good leadership, because it's great to see your different thoughts and continue this discussion. So the first 2 leadership styles that we'll discuss are autocratic and paternalistic leaders. So starting with autocratic leaders, they often make all decisions in their own interest. So something an autocratic leader might say is, do as I say or else. Under autocratic leadership, there's really no opportunity to give input or suggestions about decisions. When an autocratic leader is in authority, there may be consequences for speaking up or not following directions. So people often might feel ignored or that they're not being listened to. The second type of leadership on the slide is a paternalistic leader. And so a paternalistic leader often looks after the needs of their subordinates, but they're not allowing them to make decisions. So a paternalistic leader might say something like, I know what's best, without allowing others to share what they need. I would say maybe unlike an autocratic leader, a paternalistic leader often does mean well, and they can act kind of like a parent. And they assume, they know what's best for everyone. They have everyone's best interests at heart, but without allowing for others to have input or to make decisions, it's really hard to know whether that's true, whether they are acting in people's best interests. So looking at these 2 different types of leadership styles, I want to start by asking everybody and looking at either or, how might an autocratic or a paternalistic leader act? What are some examples that you might think of? And how might an autocratic or a paternalistic leader lead an advocacy effort? And I'll put this question in the chat also. So again, the question is, what is an example of either an autocratic or paternalistic leader that you can think of? And how might those leaders act when they lead advocacy efforts? I could start with a quick example. Oh, no, Ronald, go ahead. Share our first example. Ronald, if you want to share, I think you're still on mute. So. Okay, I think once Ronald, you're able to come off mute and share, feel free to jump in. I can share a quick example. Oh, no, Elizabeth, go ahead. Elizabeth, I'm not hearing you, but if you're able to share either verbally or in the chat, that would be great. Is this your cell phone? All right. I'm seeing Grace also sharing a good leader is one who knows the needs of his people. So maybe we can look at those ideas and apply it to what an autocratic leader might do. So if a good leader might know the needs of his people, an autocratic leader might not hold any community meetings. They might not ask for feedback on policies or decisions. A paternalistic leader might think they're doing the right thing, but it's hard to know if they don't take others' decisions and they don't listen, right? We've been talking a lot about listening. And I see also Qasim's point in the chat. I think we need to differentiate between two different terminologies. So there's a leader and a boss. So an autocratic leader might be kind of like a boss, and a paternalistic leader might be a good leader. And I'm seeing an autocratic leader is more like a dictator. Yes. Abu Bakari, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to unmute and share? You're still muted. If you want to share. For Elizabeth or Abu Bakari, if you'd like to share, feel free to unmute. I see your hands are both raised. But otherwise, I do want to also ask the second question, which is, how might you as advocates adapt your advocacy to work with these different types of leaders? Knowing that they might not be listening, they might not be asking you for your opinions or your decisions. How might you, as advocates, work with autocratic leaders or paternalistic leaders? I see Brenda sharing, and then Banya, we can go to you. I see your hand is raised. They are both not good leaders, but the autocratic leader might be worse. Yeah, so they both have problems in terms of maybe not listening to other people or asking for input. Yeah, Banya, would you like to share? I'm seeing you're unmuted, but I can't quite hear you. All right, well, we can come back to you if you'd like to share or drop in the chat. I do see a few other points in the chat in terms of, you know, autocratic leaders and paternalistic leaders maybe not prioritizing people's opinions or decisions or their needs. Stephen is sharing to develop your advocacy and autocratic leadership. Maybe you're using data and evidence to demonstrate the negative impact of something or of autocratic leadership on your organization, on communities, or on individuals. And I think that's a good point. Maybe as advocates, you know, for a specific cause or having a specific goal, you are using data and evidence to point to a problem. Another example might be, and honestly, it might be challenging.
Hello, Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes, Ganya, I can, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I have a lot of people here with me. We were broadcasting I had mounted my gadget onto the Bluetooth speaker, so you couldn't hear me. Yeah, so now you asked a question, and for me, I think both leaders are not suitable for advocacy efforts. In my practice of advocacy, to me, advocacy needs persuasion, it needs negotiations, it needs convincing, and therefore both leaders are not into those characters. They can neither persuade or convince or negotiate. And actually, negotiation is very, very key in advocacy efforts, and I use it quite a lot in my practice as an advocate. And therefore, as a leader, you need to have all those characters in order to do successful advocacy. You need to have persuasion skills. You need to have. You need to be listening, a good listener. You need to accommodate all views that are coming in. You need to be able to also negotiate with when you're doing advocacy. It needs a lot of negotiations. When you want, for example, to have certain things inclusive, then you need to do a lot of negotiation, because we must acknowledge the fact that inclusion is not an easy job or to do, and it needs a lot of education, educating the persons that we want to have inclusion in place. So it needs a lot, and that means a lot of negotiations and persuasions. So definitely the two leadership styles you're talking about here are really not good, and they can't accommodate advocacy efforts.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think what you're sharing really hits to the kind of key of leadership, especially with advocacy. It's having a toolkit of skills and knowing your context and knowing who you're working with and knowing how to navigate the situation. And with autocratic leaders, it might be very challenging, and there might be not a lot of space to navigate. So you have to think through what is possible. And same with paternalistic leaders. Maybe you have to share things on social media to get them to kind of understand your point or your goal. So I'm going to shift to the next style of leadership, but please feel free to continue dropping ideas in the chat. So we're going to look at the third style of leadership, which is a transactional leader. A transactional leader typically opposes change and motivates others with rewards and punishments. So they might make decisions based on their own personal gain, and they can be influenced by a bribe or a promise of favors. It's that idea of what you can do for me and what I can do for you. What do I get out of this? So when we think of this type of leader, maybe let's think about now, if we're trying to advocate and be advocates, how might you work as a good leader to adapt to a transactional leader? What might you need to do to adapt your advocacy to work with a transactional leader? And I'll drop this question in the chat. So how might you adapt your advocacy or your work to work with a transactional leader? I can start with a quick example. So when we're talking about maybe all the tools in your toolkit as a good leader, with a transactional leader, it might be that you have to negotiate with them and figure out a way to frame your advocacy goal in a way that the transactional leader feels like it might benefit them. What else could you maybe do as an advocate to work with a transactional leader? Any thoughts on this one? Or maybe examples of transactional leadership that you've seen in your own experience? I see a few hands raised. I'm not sure if these are older hands, but if you have a thought, feel free to also unmute and share. I see Elizabeth in the chat, to understand that the leader is transactional leader and their influence. I think, yes, that's a good point. Understanding the type of leader you're working with. I'll let you all think about this one. And I think with transactional leaders, we might see it, in our own work or in our own experiences, people who might want to gain something from your work. And so I think, thinking about how to work with people like that is another skill as a leader or as an advocate that you might experience. But in the interest of time, I am going to go to the final example of leader. Feel free to continue to add your thoughts in the chat. But in terms of the last leadership style, the democratic leader, a democratic leader is involving everyone in decision-making processes. They're inclusive of diverse voices and perspectives, and they respect the rights and dignity of others. And they're often, democratic leaders are also ethical leaders. They want to make sure everyone can contribute to decision-making. So I'm going to share a few quick examples because I think we've discussed a lot about good leadership and how it might relate to this style. But two examples of democratic leaders. One is Martin Luther King Jr., who's on the left side of the screen, and Malala Yousafzai, who is on the right side of the screen. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights leader and activist during the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. He confronted racism and advocated for an end to racist practices or legislation. Malala is currently a young activist who has been a fierce advocate for girls' education since an early age. She was targeted and shot by the Taliban and has continued to fight for girls' education and fight for young women and girls around the world. We think about these two leaders, I'm thinking about all of our good leadership qualities. What are some leadership qualities that would make these two leaders democratic or good leaders? what are some leadership qualities that we're seeing either in these leaders or in other leaders that you know that are democratic leaders? Personality, yeah. I think, you know, maybe, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. was a very, his personality was very much, I think, very driven by collaboration and working with others and building a coalition. And these are very good leaders, and they are role models that can help inspire other types of leaders. Yes, thank you, Brenda. I see Happiness, your hand is raised. Would you like to share?
Oh, fortunately, you have already spoken what I wanted to share. I wanted just to share that democratic leadership is that kind of leadership that works in collaboration and that make them to be of good leaders in the community.
Thank you. Yeah. I think you said it better than I did. It makes you a good leader, and when you're collaborating within your community. I like this idea of collective empowerment, good listening skills, empathy. One thing that I thought about too when I was thinking about these two leaders is one big difference is Malala, of course, who is active today, is also online. She's operating in digital spaces. So she's navigating both offline and online spaces in a way that is reflective of good leadership. I also, when I look at this picture of Martin Luther King Jr. in front of microphones, I'm also thinking about communication, how he was a very good and strong communicator. And yeah, they have very strong personal stories, and they talk about their stories. And I think that really will, you know, be something we discuss in our next section on communication. So are there any other thoughts about these leaders or about leadership in general? I see, Vanya, your hand is up if you want to unmute and share, but just any other thoughts on this before we wrap up this section?
Yes, Ronald.
Oh, yes, sorry, go ahead, Ronald.
I think empathy is also another key aspect of their character, especially Martin Luther he had a lot of empathy for the people that he was advocating for. And so as a leader, you need to need to know the situation of the people advocating for. You should be able to understand their point of view, how the situation they are going through, and how they perceive the challenges that they are facing.
Exactly. Which again, understanding the challenges others are facing, understanding their point of view, I think really speaks to that importance of communication, which we're going to touch on next. So just to wrap this part up, you know, not all leaders might be good leaders or ethical leaders. Sometimes we still need to work with these leaders to advance our advocacy, but we all can, of course, strive to be the best leaders in our own lives, in our own work. I think with that, I'll pass to Ashley for a discussion on inclusive communication, which we've already started to touch on. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks everyone for such active participation and really thoughtful comments as it relates to leadership and the wonderful points that you raise and some interesting points that you raise for us to think about as well as it relates back to inclusive leadership. You know, and I think you all have made it very clear, and especially Sarah, as you facilitated that part, one of the key aspects of democratic or ethical leadership is really good communication. And many of you have said that this allows for all voices, all perspectives, all ideas to really be shared in the decision-making process. And so good communication is truly inclusive communication. Again, so that people's ideas are recognized, respected, and that various forms of communication are used to really ensure that each person is able to, again, access and participate in these conversations, in these decision-making processes, especially as it relates to their own lives. So originally I was going to sort of ask for you all to offer some good examples of communication skills, but I think we've covered that a bit. But I do want to switch it up a little bit and maybe ask, you know, what are some of the different methods or forms of communication that we can use as democratic leaders, as ethical leaders, to really ensure that people can participate in these conversations, access these conversations, share what they think. So I would welcome your ideas on some of those different kind of methods that we can use. And maybe I'll kick us off. You know, on the PowerPoint slide, one of the images you see of characters is using sign language. This is a really, really good method to be using for persons with disabilities to make sure they are included in conversations. Brenda, you're raising a good one as well, kind of looking at the different aspects of verbal and nonverbal communication. Again, we'll get more into this as we go through. And good body language is mentioned in the chat as well. Yeah, Sharon, you mentioned one-on-one communication. This can be really important, especially working with what we might call spoilers in our advocacy work, people who maybe challenge advocacy efforts. And so speaking with them one-on-one, you know, you really sharing your personal story or some data to back up why your advocacy efforts are important, you know, that can be more effective with speaking with folks who really oppose your efforts. That one, excuse me, that one-to-one personal conversation can have some really positive effects. So that's a great aspect to raise. I see also in the chat we have gestures, eye contact, facial expressions. I often get in trouble for my facial expressions in meetings. Let's see. We also have sharing ideas from other people and respecting their opinions. So I would call that maybe tolerance, being respectful of other people's ideas, even if it's different than your own. Courtesy. Jackson, this is a really good one as well. You know, really identifying folks by their preferred names. You know, persons with disabilities. Also being sensitive to how people identify themselves and their pronouns, right? Being responsive. Yumna, this is good. Pictures and cartoons, right? So symbols, images, videos, Kasim, emails, and you see this on the slide as well. There's, I think if I'm seeing it correctly, someone's using a phone. So maybe that's a text message, or maybe it's a phone call. Emails have a lot of power when it comes to advocacy as a great way to connect with leaders as well. So all of these are fantastic points. And maybe we can go to the next slide, Sarah, and I can just kind of fill in a few that maybe weren't said. You know, I think something we talked about earlier was active listening. You know, sometimes that means having a conversation and sort of reiterating back to someone what they've said to confirm you're hearing what it is that they're actually saying to you. we've talked about verbal and nonverbal communication, which we'll get into a little bit more. Another really important aspect of good communication skills is really sort of setting the tone, setting the room, if you will, so that it's a friendly, a respectful environment. And going back to that comment in the chat about, being tolerant of others' opinions. And I know we talked about this under the leadership portion of being understanding and empathetic to others. Something a bit more practical is speaking clearly. Sometimes being mindful of speaking a bit slower than you might normally speak to make sure people can understand you, or if they're trying to read your lips, they can pick up on the words that you're saying. And I think it's really important that, as you all are mentioning, there are multiple forms of communication methods. But what's really important, and especially with your advocacy efforts, that you're tailoring your communication styles. And what we have found to be really effective to increase accessibility, to increase inclusion, is to make sure we're communicating on multiple platforms. So the same message, our advocacy messages, our goals are being communicated in multiple ways, but then also tailored to diverse populations to make sure that everyone is, having the same opportunity to engage in some of these efforts and able to bring awareness to them as well. And so when we think about all of these good communication skills, I want to kind of bring us back to some really effective communication principles. So typically when we, discuss communication with our partners, we talk about it in terms of 5 different communication principles. And so you see on the slide, and I'll read them out. The first communication principle is that communication is two-way. The second is communication needs a purpose. The third is communication is continuous. The fourth is communication is irreversible. And the fifth is communication is verbal and nonverbal. And so I want to talk through a few of these today in the little bit of time that we have remaining. And I really want to focus on 3 of them. So communication needs a purpose, is irreversible, and then this point about verbal and nonverbal communication. So let's get into the first one. Communication needs a purpose. So I think something that we've all talked about is that communication is meant to inform, it's meant to persuade, it's meant to build relationships or to entertain. And you certainly talked about this at the WIDAR Festival in April, as you talked about storytelling being a purposeful communication tool and a strong tool for advocacy. Your story having a beginning, a middle, an end, and it really aiming to share a lesson or some sort of key takeaway for the audience to sort of take back and reflect on. And so what you see on the screen on the left side of the PowerPoint, I've taken 2 screenshots from an animated video that some disability rights advocates have put together in Sri Lanka. And so the top screenshot on the slide shows a young woman in a wheelchair. And the caption says, let me see here. No matter what anyone says, I will not stop my political journey. And I want to point out that in the bottom of that first screenshot, you'll see there's a man demonstrating sign language. And then in the second screenshot at the bottom of this slide, there's text that says diversity of political leadership will ensure inclusive decision-making. Let's actively encourage youth, women, and persons with disabilities to participate in the political processes of Sri Lanka. And so thinking back to this principle that communication needs a purpose, I want to ask, what do you think the purpose of this video is? Now, I understand I've only showed you 2 screenshots, but I do hope that these 2 are powerful enough for you to get a sense of what the story is. What is the purpose of this video? And I welcome you to share what you think the purpose is. Brenda, please, I see your hand.
All right, thank you. To me, I think this young lady who is in a wheelchair was trying maybe to maybe contest for a political position, and maybe she was being dismissed or discriminated because of her physical appearance, and that is why she's trying to say that no matter what anyone says, I will not stop my political journey. So maybe she was being discriminated because she had maybe physical impairment or something like that. I don't know if I'm right. Thank you.
Yeah, Brenda, that's absolutely correct. This is a young woman with a disability who, and great job for picking up on this without having, much information to go on, but she's interested in running for political office. And so that's what that first screenshot is really looking at. And so very well done on figuring that part out. Ronald, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, not very much different from what Brenda has said. I think she's making a political statement. She's vying for a position, and her point is straight and clear. She wants to change the sense of politics in Sri Lanka. Have persons with disability in leadership. To have that, to ensure there is the inclusion in decision making. And 2, in the video, like you had described, I see there is a lot of inclusion with the captions, with a sign language interpreter, yes, and all the text. It can be, the communication is clear to everyone. It is inclusive of everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ronald, you see too that there are 2 languages on the second screenshot. Yeah. So that's another way that they've sort of made this more inclusive, right? Elizabeth, I see your hand is raised. Elizabeth, would you like to share? Oh. And I see Elizabeth in the chat has said, I think she's denied a chance. It can be due to different varieties, like she's a female, disability, and she won't stop. Exactly. That's exactly correct. So Elizabeth, with your hand raised, if you want to put in the chat your thoughts, we would welcome that. A couple of things before we move to the next principle. One thing I want to point out when it comes to inclusive communication, and I touched on this a little bit, is it's really important that we use simple language. Oftentimes, we are experts in our own lives and our own work. And we use words that might be considered jargon. And not everybody is familiar with those kind of words. And so it's really important to make sure that if we are using jargon, we're defining it, right? We're not making assumptions that people know what that means, but also that we're using simple language, especially when it comes to translating, written word into different languages. The other aspect I want to raise with this one is that when you are conducting your advocacy, and someone mentioned earlier this idea of representation, this is really important to keep in mind with your efforts too, that you are representing the multiple groups of people that you are advocating for in your efforts, and really making sure that you're uplifting their stories and their experiences on relevant materials, such as, social media posts, these animated videos, any sort of pamphlets. So just a couple of things to keep in mind as you work towards your advocacy and really designing, your efforts with a real purpose, and making sure you're communicating that purpose. So we'll move on to our next principle. And this one is fairly straightforward, I hope, but communication is irreversible. Excuse me. So we know that once we say something to someone, that may not always stay with that person. And sometimes the message can be mixed up and be something very different by the time it goes through 10 other people and comes back to you. So, communication is something that is spread through word of mouth, but it's also something that can be spread on social media in these online spaces. So as you're communicating and developing your messages for your advocacy efforts, keep this in mind. What you put out there is going to stay forever. It is going to, be shared verbally through perhaps friends or colleagues. And then, as I said, it's something that could be, in the internet ether forever, especially, if someone were to take a photo of your post and share it with someone else, even if you were to take it down, it still lives on. So this is where it's really important to kind of remember, ethical leadership in the sense that you want to be honest and you really want to be factual and accurate with the information you're putting out there. If you're not, it's an opportunity for someone to really discredit your advocacy. And that can be really challenging as you try to advocate for your goals. And one example I wanted to share with you, there's a social media post, I think this is from Twitter, that you see on the left side of the PowerPoint screen. And it shows how easy it is to promote harmful narratives, which again can really block your advocacy efforts. So, for example, the original Twitter post and the story that it links to aims to discredit Greta Thunberg and imply that her concerns about climate change are sort of linked to her being mentally unstable. And for those who aren't familiar with Greta, she's a young climate activist out of Sweden. And she has a psychosocial disability. So she identifies as neurodivergent. And it's really unfortunate that the original post is really aiming to try to discredit her by her identity as a child, as a young person under 18, and then also as someone who has a disability. So I put this up here just to show how easily harmful narratives can come up in your work as you advocate for things you care about. And I'd also like to share that in our next training in August, we're going to focus more on digital advocacy through social media. And so we're going to share even more tips about making social media posts more accessible, ways that you can counter things like this. So ways to report false or harmful information, and really prepare you with more safe and digital practices for you to communicate your own advocacy efforts online more effectively. And Yumna, yeah, I see your hands raised.
Yes, I have a vivid example of what you said, you have just said.
Yeah.
It happened today to one of my friends, one of my very close friends. She's a deaf. And yesterday there was an appointment for leaders in our country. And she tweeted that in this appointed position, is there any person with disability appointed? And a lot of negative comments raised on her post. People were commenting that you are just saying that you people with disability, you just want to be appointed. You have no categories to be, you don't fit in those positions. So it's very true. You might, in our advocacy process, people might comment negative, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are people that we would call spoilers, you know, that you can identify as people who think opposite of you do in terms of your advocacy goal. And so we'll talk a little bit more in the next training about how you can kind of work with them and sort of against them to counter their own efforts to negatively impact your advocacy. But Yumna, thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you.
And so the last principle we want to dig into a little bit is this one on communication is verbal and nonverbal. And I think so many of you have raised excellent points as it relates to this principle in the chat, and then, you know, also verbally as we talked about leadership. I think the biggest impact or lesson that you can learn from this principle is that communication is more than just verbal words. There's a pie chart on the left side of the PowerPoint. And when we talk about personal communication, research has really proven that the impact of what we say can be looped into these three ways. So 55% of our communication is body language. 38% is voice and tone, and only 7% is the actual words that we speak. So the tone of our voice or our body language, like hand gestures, facial expressions, raised eyebrows, which I know I do all the time, whether or not we're sort of slouched in our chair or, you know, presenting ourselves in a more sort of confident way, you know, this really impacts the message that we're communicating. It impacts how people respond to that message and how they sort of receive it. And so, you know, for the sake of time, I was going to ask, you know, what are some of the nonverbal cues or tactics that you use in your own efforts? But again, I think through the chat and through the course of this conversation, you all have raised quite a few of them. So I might just bring our attention to the final point on this slide, that as much as possible, you know, we want to make sure that we are communicating in accessible and inclusive ways. Things like symbols, pictures, alt text for digital photos, which we'll get into in our next training. Again, sign language interpretation, like I showed under the first principle we discussed, transcripts to videos, captions. There's also the use of Braille as much as we can with more tactical materials. And I hope today we've done a good job of, describing photos that are on your presentations. These are really impactful ways that help folks to sort of understand what your message is and what you're really talking about. And so maybe just to quickly cover the other two principles that we didn't have, time to go into in depth. Just a reminder that communication is a two-way street, right? It's equal parts talking and listening. A really good communicator is someone who is able to listen to others and to take the messages that they're receiving and put them into action. And the last point is simply communication is continuous. There's not always a need to have an endpoint to a conversation, and that's okay. Some people need to really digest what is conveyed in a conversation. Sometimes it's really good to just take a step back to reflect on what's being talked about, especially if you are hearing new ideas that maybe are not reflective of your own. But it's a good opportunity to step away from the conversation, to think through what was said, to try to sort of see other people's opinions and perspectives. And then to kind of think about next steps. So what does that follow-up conversation looks like? And this relates really well to our advocacy efforts. Advocacy is a deliberate process, and it's not a one-time thing. It's something that we do on an ongoing basis. So, keeping in mind that communication is continuous and always sort of thinking about, what can be sort of next steps in our advocacy efforts? How can we be following up with people to advance our efforts? These are things that are really, really important to think about. And maybe, just to close, just a quick reminder of the leadership styles we talked about: autocratic, paternalistic, transactional, and democratic. And then again, our 5 communication principles we just discussed. To kind of end today, I'd really like to reflect for a few minutes, especially with this sort of communication is continuous idea. What is it that really struck a chord with you today? What is something that you learned today, something maybe new that you hadn't thought of before that you learned from this conversation? Maybe someone put something in the chat that really sort of sparked a new idea or resonated with you. We'd really love to hear what was useful from today, or what was a shining bright moment for you and something that you'll take away and use in your own advocacy campaigns. So please do share with us. Brenda, I see your hands raised, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. What I can say, first of all, today it was a very informative session. I really learned and unlearned a lot of things, but what really caught my attention was that communication is irreversible, and we must be mindful of whatever we put on social media, especially because this will spread widely, and we do not know the after effects of that information that we have put on social media. And secondly is that we just have to to make our communication with a great purpose. It's not about going making noise everywhere, with everyone, but you must be purposeful. You must be knowing what you are really going to talk about. And or if you find people in a conversation already, please don't just comment or don't just make any conclusions. First know the start or the genesis of the conversation, and then you come in to make your conclusions or make your comments or suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. That's wonderful reflection and really nice to hear. I see in the chat that Sharon had said we should be respectful of how we communicate to each other. Absolutely. Personality, integrity, and hearing from you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Another Elizabeth said, what I learned today will help me in doing my task well as a leader, to advocating, and key elements to communication, including accessibility. Yeah, did anyone else want to unmute and share any reflections? Makomu, did you, Stephen? Did you want to share? Or Abel?
Yeah. Hello.
Is this Abel?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. For myself, I can say, if you want to communicate, to start the communication, first you must understand the people who you are going to communicate with them. You must know each other. You must know the purpose of communication. You must know what you are going to talk about. You must be competent on what you are going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And consider all people, regardless to their disability. I think it's the best way to ensure effective communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Abel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And maybe I'll just read a couple of reflections that I see in the chat as well. Let's see here. Kasim says, don't judge others, respect for diversity. Listening is a
you can hear me.
And be open-minded. Donald, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
Yeah, actually, I was looking at where to raise up my hand, but I couldn't see. So it's important. I'm just placed in the. We just placed in the chat the aspect of accessibility. I think is very key. However much we may have it two-way, we can have it continuous, we can have it reversible. But if the targeted personality is not able to access it, you know, in the right channel, and of course also in the right language, then it may miss a point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really
one of the principles. But where exactly is it? For example, you do a communication and then you place it, maybe a written communication, and then you want to put it on a board where people can read it. Maybe it's a public place, but then somebody in a wheelchair is not able, is raised, and somebody in a wheelchair is not able to, you know, get that particular communication. So the person definitely will miss it out. And again, two, you may be doing it through, maybe doing a communication through a video, maybe radio or TV, for example, and then nobody is doing sign language interpretation, then it means access to that particular communication is curtailed. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's great, Donald. I really appreciate those reflections. Those are really nice to hear. And I see we are at time, and before I hand it back to, maybe we'll hear from Cosmos really fast, since we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, how are you all?
Hi, Cosmos.
In my thinking, it is that the topic today was very important about leadership styles and how can they contribute to developing advocacy. In my view, what I feel what is important is participation. In most cases, if there is no participation, then you cannot know even whether the language you are using is possible. I'm taking an example when I started the ICT for the deaf. First, I had to look at where can I find language for the deaf so that they can learn ICT. I did not find any area. Instead, what we decided together was first to create our own sign language and then use them for teaching and learning. And things went well. And what I see is that through involvement, mainly participation from initiation and owning their own, the innovation, these people with disabilities, they can do a lot of wonders. For example, now I find that the blind can repair a PC, and just this year, one person who became blind at the age of 30 managed to learn ICT, and this year got an employment in the Ministry of Health as an accountant, which indicates that everything is possible, provided people with disabilities advocate for their own rights, and provided they get opportunity to learn the skills that necessitates to enhance their life skills. Thank you for this lesson, and I think maybe you will share this PowerPoint so that we can continue learning in our own. Thank you so much.
Yes, Cosmos, thank you. That is also a good reflection for us to end this training on. And we will definitely share out this PowerPoint. We've made it accessible as well, so it should be good to use for screen readers. And again, you know, I echo Sarah and Filippo's comments of thanking you all so much for your active participation. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts verbally and in the chat. And I will just say, you know, thanks again to everyone on the team who supported this event to make it happen, for you all for showing up and for being active and engaged participants. It's been an honor for me and Sarah to be here with you all. We look forward to seeing you all again in August. But for now, I'll hand it back to Filippo to close us out formally.
Wow, thank you so much, Sarah and Ashley. Let's give them a round of applause. This has been a very exciting, very engaged session. And, you know, I can't wait for the next one. So again, apologies about the problem with the captions. We were trying to make it work on Zoom, and Zoom just was not cooperating with us. But as we said before, we will post the recording of this session to our wider website. And also the presentation is going to be available, and there is going to be a transcript on there for those who might want to review or share it with their friends and with others. I'm also going to put some links in the chat, and I'll come to those in a moment. But as you know, this session is part of a series of online sessions and a program with others. I'm being told captions are working now. Okay, I can't see them, but maybe somebody can. Thank you, Dan. This is part of a series of events that's going to continue through the end of this year, and very soon we're going to release the calendar for some of those events going into the next few months. But as we've heard, Ashley and Sarah are going to be back with us on August 10th to talk about social media and disability rights advocacy. So we're looking forward to that for sure. And our next session is going to be before theirs on July 6th. We're going to have Dr. Miro Griffiths from the University of Leeds talking about young people and disability activism in disability rights activism in Europe. I've also included a link to his project and his profile there in the chat if you want to check him out. Another link we have in there is the link to the IFES Disability Inclusion page. And so if you're interested in checking out more of their work, you can do that too. Let me just also remind the young leaders who are here with us through the ADD program that if you're going to participate in at least 80% of these sessions, a certificate is going to be handed to you at the end of our online program. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. There's been great engagement. I'm sure you've got a lot to, take away with you from today's session. Thanks again to Ashley and Sarah. And we will see you again on July 6th with Dr. Miro Griffiths. We will be sharing the details for that, the event to sign, the link to sign up and the Zoom link through our usual channels via email and WhatsApp as well. And yes, if you're interested in receiving our updates on the youth-disability.org website, you can sign up for our emails. All right, thank you very much. Good day and good night to all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.